Hi, I'm Khushboo Razdan, and this is Foreign Correspondents Talk Series 2024, an initiative by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA, where we invite members of the foreign press community to talk about their work story and experiences. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Washington based Brazilian journalist and scholar, and my colleague, Igor Patrick. Hi, Igor. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you. We see each other almost every day at work, and it's kind of surreal that I'm seeing you like this. You're dressed so formal and in this setup, but such a wonderful pleasure to have you. So I'll start right away. You are from Brazil. You covered China. You cover U.S., China, Latin America relations. Something that's right now really really important, very important region, very important countries right here. But first, I want to ask you, you started your career in Brazil. What kind of stories did you cover back then? Were you always interested in China, or did you start your career covering Brazilian politics?
I mean, like after finishing my bachelor's, it was mostly China for most of my time, I would say. Like international affairs in general, but China was always sort of my beat. Before that, I did a bit of politics, economics, did a bit of science and technology as well. But China was always there. And the reason why China was a big part of my career was because, like in 2014, I went to China for an exchange program at Peking University. It was totally by accident, has many things in my life, in my career, and I never planned to go to China. And when I got there, like I was mesmerized for everything I was seeing. And it also came with this urge of telling people in my country what was going on there, and the importance of paying attention to China. Um, and that's why China sort of became like the core of my whole career. Like, of course, I was like dealing with other stuff in international affairs because especially in a country like Brazil, where we don't have like many journalists specialized in international relations, you sort of have to take like you have to tackle a number of topics, but China was always there. China was always like my focus, and it was the country that I was going to read about, I was going to buy books about, and like what I would discuss with my friends in my spare time. So yeah.
So was it because I'm curious to understand, was during that time when you started growing interest in China, was it how was the relationship between Brazil and China? Did that have anything to do with that, or was it just purely personal that how was that by chance that you went to Beijing?
Yeah, a bit of both, I would say. I mean, if it wasn't for like the growing relations between Brazil and China, I don't think I would get a scholarship to go to Peking University, right? In the first place. So yeah, China became the main trading partner with Brazil in 2009, following many years of like exchanges and like growth in general, like in the diplomatic relations between the two countries. And then so actually so like in 2013, like Brazil had like this program that would like offer scholarships for students to go overseas for a year,
Mhm.
sometimes 2 years depending on the country. And I initially planned to go to Australia actually, but
Oh.
then, like there was this program to go to Peking University. I did some research and I saw the university was great. And I mean, I can always go to Australia at some point. That was what I thought at that time. But like I never imagined myself going to China and experiencing such a different culture from what I was used to. And then like decided to go, and when I was there, I would say like half, like 50% of like deciding on doing what I do today was based on like my personal curiosity. I was just like so intrigued by everything I was seeing. Like at that, I mean, China is going through like a rough period now in terms of like economic development, but at that time, China was booming, right? Like I remember like I would like cross the road and like see dozens of buildings being constructed, and then like 2 weeks later, boom, there was like a new complex with 12 new brand new buildings. And together with this economic growth, you would see like people so curious to learn about the outside and to engage with in like conversations with like the rest of like the foreigners community in Beijing to try to get a gist of like the experiences in China and how it is like compared to like other countries and stuff. So I was fascinated, to be honest. Like it was something completely different that I experienced in my whole life. And contrary to like what happens here in the US, where you have like Chinatowns all over. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest like Asian community in Brazil doesn't come from China, it comes from Japan. So like growing up, my only reference to like Asian culture, East Asian culture, if I can say that, was Japanese culture. The biggest like Asian town that we have is the Japanese town we have in São Paulo, a neighborhood called Liberdade, that can be translated as freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then like China was something that like I would like see some movies and I was familiar with like some stuff, but not to the same extent I was with like Japan, for example. And I really wanted to write about it, mostly because there was an excuse to satisfy my curiosity and learn about this new place that I was discovering totally by accident. And also like I felt that to the degree of like the importance of the relationship between China and Brazil, like our media wasn't doing justice. Um, I, I, I mean, the fact that like when I went there, China was already the main trading partner to Brazil for 5 years. And even like in my case, like a person that works with media, that is like doing journalism on a daily basis, I wasn't like aware of what was going on. Like I kept having like this thought in my mind that like if I don't understand and I'm a person like sort of like related to these topics, how about like a normal like housewife or like a person that never thought about China before, but like his job or like their job actually, or like their daily lives are like directly impacted by this relationship, how they assess this relationship and how do we like pressure elected officials on doing stuff on our behalf with China that could benefit our communities, you know? So it was a bit of both, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I want to mention for those who don't know, Peking University is one of the most prestigious universities in the world and in China. And so, what happened at Peking? Did you finish your scholarship and fellowship and came back to Brazil, and then you had this urge to go back, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I finished the scholarship, went back to Brazil. And after that, like, so before going to China, I always thought I would be dedicating myself to like write about like cultural subjects, actually. I was very interested in like films and arts in general, which is something surprising for everyone that meets me these days. Yeah, and then when I came back, I was like, wow, this is a new world. So I started like buying books and like bothering my editors, pitching stories about China. And like for a few years, I was always like this weird kid that like would be interested in China for like no particular reason, but always suggesting stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I only decided to make it like as a profession in 2019 when I decided to go back to China for a master's program. This time, like specializing in Chinese studies,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, I would say, because Chinese studies sounds more like you're learning the language, and that wasn't necessarily the case. Focused on politics and international relations. And when I went there, I was sort of like betting on like the importance of China in the coming years, right? Like I thought that sooner or later, media outlets in Brazil, they would need someone with like specialized knowledge on China, and I could fill that void since there wasn't like many people doing this for like legacy media.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I did this, and I went to China for one semester. Then COVID happened. I was outside of China. When I came back to Brazil, I mean, I was traveling Southeast Asia because that was right in the middle of the winter break. And when I came back to Brazil, I was very surprised by the amount of media outlets reaching out to me, asking for me to do stories for them, to write stuff, to do broadcasting stories, because everyone was talking about COVID. And then after COVID, like I think people finally realized that like whatever China does or says or behaves, it's gonna impact the world in general, and that's gonna change their lives for good or worse. And so like I would say like this bet paid out much quicker than I was expecting, much faster in general. Yeah. anyway.
Yeah, so how was so you went back, you went in 2014 for the first time, right? And then when was the next trip? When was the next month?
2018, I went there. I was invited to cover a few events on the 40 years anniversary of the opening up in reforms.
Hmm.
So I was in Beijing, and then I went to Guangdong, a southern province in China, for those not familiar with the map. Um, and then like it was actually during that trip that I decided to do it for real, because like for many years that was something that I had like in the back of my mind, and I was like, okay, so perhaps one day I'll do something about it. And when I was there, I met this professor, and he was, oh yeah, we have like this scholarship here now, like for young Chinese scholars, like you should like apply. And I never thought about myself as a scholar. I still do not think about myself as a scholar. It's more like a journalist.
Hmm.
But academia is like kind of like the only way you have when you're interested in a particular subject and you need time to educate, to research, to talk to people, and to learn, right? So I decided to apply. I actually had like a very good offer to go to Denmark that year, but I decided to like let go and go to China, experiment China for the first time in so many years again for the long term. And yeah, and then I came back in 2021 for a second master's
Hmm.
at Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University. This time, a master's in global affairs. And I thought I needed to do it because when I was in China at Peking University, I was learning about China with Chinese professors, and it was such a valuable experience. But I always felt that there was something lacking in the sense of like how do we connect this knowledge that I was getting to the West, to what was happening here. And Schwarzman was like the obvious choice at that time, and it was quite an experience, I would say, because I was in China during COVID zero. It wasn't easy.
I was there as well. It started in front of us, right? We
Yeah.
were, we were both there.
You know,
So,
I still have the email from the university, from Peking University, when there like
uh-huh.
rumors started about this new virus in Wuhan. We received like an email from Peking University saying that like, oh, so far, all we're like seeing indicates that you can only get it if you eat contaminated food. So be mindful about where you eat, and you should be fine. And I still keep this email because for me, it's a piece of history, you know, like.
I do. I remember going to Hama and buying a lot of groceries because I thought everything is going to shut down.
Oh,
And I,
did you buy a lot of toilet papers as well?
yeah, I did. I was one of those. I went home. I was like, let's go, let's go, let's go. We have to do this. Just the instinct. So, a lot of, you talked about that people were not really interested in covering China or what was happening in China before. Now everybody is talking about China. China is the the hot button topic around here in the US where we are. I want to know how things are different back in Brazil now. Are people really talking about China as much as we talk about China in the US?
Not to the same extent as here in the US, because I think China became a matter of national security here in the US. China doesn't present like itself as a threat to Latin America yet.
Hmm.
So far, most of the investments and like the good relationships in general, they were like beneficial to the countries in the region. So although, of course, like you see the reflex of what's going on here, like in Latin America with some like political groups, is not as big as it is now. But like especially after the pandemic, I think China definitely, at least in Brazil and in Argentina, to some extent in Mexico as well, China definitely became part of the domestic politics discourse. Pew Research Center, a think tank here in Washington, there you're quite familiar with, I suppose.
Hmm.
They did a research in Brazil last year, and they found that like people who support the current president, left wing, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva,
Hmm.
they tend to support China. People that support Bolsonaro, the former president, aligned with the far right, they tend to dislike China. So you're seeing a trend now where like being associated with China or not is a matter of like which side of the aisle you support, you know? And because of this, compared to what it was before I went to China, I would say like it changed completely. You even like even though we still don't have many journalists with like specialized knowledge to cover China, not to the same extent that like I do and other friends do. Um, you see that like the newspapers are paying attention to this relationship. Like the main newspapers, at least like once per day, they're gonna have a story on China, even if it is not directly related to Brazil, but they are gonna be talking about China somehow. Like last year, for example, I wrote like a long piece on like the party's Congress that gave Xi Jinping a third term. I don't think like Brazilian media in general paid so much attention to such an obscure meeting of the Chinese Communist Party before. And that's because they understand the consequences now, right? Like the effects of like electing Xi Jinping for a new term, especially considering the circumstances around that choice. And yeah, I can only see it growing. It's not
So
going back to what it was.
you said that the current president of Brazil has good relations with China. How does Brazil balance it out with the US? Because the US has been going out and telling allies to be wary of China, the China threat, the national security threat. How is China? How is Brazil balancing that relationship?
That's a difficult question. I don't see Brazil balancing
Mm-hmm.
this thing yet. Like Brazil, like historically, Brazil was always pretty neutral, except for like the World War II when we joined the US, France, and like the others, like the UK, to fight the Nazis and the fascists in Italy. But in general, Brazil has a consistent path of diplomacy being neutral. But it's increasingly difficult to be neutral in this environment, right? And I mean, both countries, the US and China, they're very important to Brazil in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of relationship. I mean, even if we wanted, it's not like we can like ignore the US. It's our own region. Historically, it was actually the first country to recognize Brazil's independence in 1808.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and our relations, they date back way back compared to China. We only established relations with the PRC 50 years ago. The US has been a strong and reliable partner of Brazil for almost 200 years now. But the thing is, like, for many years, we're about to see if that's going to change due to like how the economy is suffering in China now. But for many years, China was the country with like big pockets, right? They had the money to do investments. They were the ones like helping with infrastructure. And here in the US, you see exactly the opposite. Not to count for the fact that like the US supported a dictatorship regime in Brazil for so many years, for 25 years. Um, but yeah, like so the US wasn't willing to invest. The US wasn't willing to borrow money, to lend money, I'm sorry. And China was. So at a certain point, it was a matter of, okay, so we have this viable option here on the other side of the world. These people like willing to cooperate with us with the so-called win-win cooperation slash relationship, right? The Chinese love saying this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know how that's gonna play out in the coming years, though, because like I was talking to this scholar from Chile the other day, and he said something that is very true. Investments these days, because of these toxic dynamics between the US and China, investments come attached to a flag. And it's increasingly difficult to differentiate like Chinese investments purely from like engagement with like China and China's diplomacy and so on. But the problem is that like the US continues to insist on not doing it. So instead of like investing and really engaging with countries in the region, and I'm not only talking about Brazil here, I'm talking about the whole region, they give you a lecture on what to do and what what to avoid. So like for many of these countries, and especially for many of these leaders, it's always like, okay, so if you don't have the money, like show us the money. If you don't have the money, like why are you complaining, you know? And this is very different from like historically you would see in the region where like many countries would like automatically align with the US on many issues. That was the case during the Soviet Union period, mostly because like in these countries we had dictatorships supported by the US, encouraged by the US, financially and militarily as well. That's not the case anymore. So it will require a new strategy that like so far I haven't seen the US doing it.
And also Brazil is is a partner with China and India and South Africa on the BRICS platform, and increasingly South Africa and the BRICS platform, especially Brazil, has been has emerged as a regional leader even for the global South. Both Brazil, India, and China are kind of in a sort of a competition to represent the global South. How is that going? What's happening in the BRICS dynamic, the power dynamics? We have new members coming in. Is there no tension? You said there's Brazil and China have good relations, but is there no tension between these two powers who are trying to with India in the mix, trying to represent, everybody's trying to become a voice for the global South? What's happening there?
No, for sure. I mean, like we don't have the same like difficult dynamics that India and China do, for example, because you have like a history of like borders, like
Real problems. We have real problems.
yeah, I mean we are not direct neighbors of China, right? Like I feel that like this image of China as a threat is much more perceived in the region than like with other partners in the global south, especially in Latin America and Africa. Uh, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Brazil agrees with China on everything. So just like since you mentioned the expansion of BRICS, what my sources tell me is that Brazil and India together, they resisted for many years on expanding the bloc for different reasons. In the case of Brazil, I mean, you can speak better about India than I do, but like for Brazil, what I hear is that first, they didn't want to lose the sway and the influence they have today. So like one thing is to have consensus within like five voices, but when you start like adding new voices, it becomes increasingly difficult. Second, Brazil didn't want to be perceived by the West as like a country siding with China, sort of like in this new order, anti Western institutions, right? Like so we were happy to join the NZB. Particularly, I think it's a great idea. And we played along with BRICS because, like, at that point, China was pressuring Brazil and India so much that there wasn't really a way out of this. But the way to do it, in the case of Brazil, was to include a neighbor country. In that case, Argentina.
Mhm.
It didn't work well.
That's a way forward to see what happens in BRICS next. We haven't seen any much movement there so far ever since the
I mean,
expansion.
from the perspective of like realism in international relations, it's
Mhm.
very much in the interest of these countries to like add these new members, right? Like with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, that means BRICS will be playing the cards when it comes to oil, for example. And oil is like it's the base for like how stable the dollar is. So it makes a lot of sense. I don't think Saudi Arabia will start like selling dollars in local, not selling dollars, selling oil in local currencies anytime soon because there is still a strong alignment between Saudi Arabia and the US.
Mhm.
We also have to see how these relations will play out together with other conflicts that we have in the world, right? Like right now we have the active invasion of Russia in Ukraine. You have Israel perpetrating what some call a genocide in Gaza, and the way Saudi Arabia and Iran they perceive this thing in their region, and the way the U.S. decided to look to the other way and pretend that it's not happening or doing so little to protect civilians there. All of this together, they will represent a big shift in like international relations in general, right? So like from this perspective, it makes sense. I just I think like from like all the countries, like the original founders of BRICS, Brazil has a different relation when it comes to democracy, I would say, because like we got democracy back in Brazil after a huge civilian movement to be able to vote again for president and to restore democracy. Um, and for many people, and we saw that in the last elections, like preserving democracy is a huge value. It's perhaps one of the most important values they have. Um, and in the last like national elections there, Lula against Bolsonaro, we saw there Lula was portraying himself as this like guardian of democracy, presenting Bolsonaro as a threat, which is something that we are probably going to see here in the US again with Biden and Trump.
Mhm.
And we all know that like for not only for the current members, but also for the new members of BRICS, democracy is not necessarily a value that they want to preserve or promote, right? And because of this, and because like civil society in Brazil is quite active when it comes to this, especially after 4 years of Bolsonaro, you see a lot of pushbacks within like the domestic political discourse in Brazil against like Brazil siding with these new members. And we are gonna have to see if like our nation's interests are gonna uh, they're gonna be bigger than than like this sort of like ideological talk on like the need to preserve democracy and to side with like the liberal values of the Western-led organizations.
Like my like the Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar recently, said that it's not that we are anti-West body. It's just that we are non-West. So do not consider anything which is not Western as anti-West. It can be non-West, and we can still pave a path forward. So going a little further away from what we're talking about, you started your China journey as an exchange student, right?
Yeah.
But how, we are seeing so much rhetoric about China as a threat, so much of, in the garb of that national security threat, we are seeing a lot of comments which are, kind of xenophobic, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which can be easily, identified, or as xenophobic. How important it is, for countries to have these exchange programs with a country like China, about which there's so much, misunderstanding and misperceptions also. How do you think? Because right now, what we're seeing is a kind of decoupling at the cultural level as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this, this decoupling culturally, people to people decoupling, given that you yourself started your China journey as an exchange student?
I think people to people is fundamental, right? Like going to China for the first time completely changed how I see China. Not only in a positive way, but also in a negative way when it comes to like other stuff. It gave me a better way to assess what was going on there and translate this to people who perhaps will never have the opportunity to go to China, and for them to understand the impacts of like this so-called China's rise has on their own lives. So like yeah, like and in general, like personally speaking, like I don't consider myself a communist. That's not a political model that I would see that I would like to see in my country or in other countries. But it doesn't necessarily mean that like I would reject anything related to China. Matter of fact, like I love the country. I love the people that I have there. I have so many friends, so many like special people that I miss every day. And like being able to experience that firsthand, going there, nothing beats that. Like you can read as much as you want, you can watch movies, you can talk to scholars, but like being able to experience that it's quite different. And that's not only for China, right? Like anytime I travel to any country, like I come back a little bit different. My perspectives like on like how the world works, how people work, they change. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have to take into consideration some risks involved in going to China. I went to China in a very different time when it comes to like the political uh, scenario there. Like that was 1 year after Xi Jinping became the Secretary General of the Communist Party. At that time, he didn't have like really the time to lay out his policies and like everything that followed suit. Um, I must say that I don't know, like today, if I would be willing to go to China to do what I did at that time. I would probably still go, but I think like for people that are not necessarily familiar with like the country, the language, the culture, I understand why people think twice. And I think that's something China needs to reevaluate. Now there is this constant fear of being targeted as like a spy or like a threat to national security. We've been increasingly hearing about exit bans, like foreigners being forbidden from leaving the country. And that's something that people pay into consideration when they decide to go somewhere to study. Also, like with this whole China threat narrative here in the US, that is such a BS. Apologies, but I think like many students, for example, many brilliant students who would love to go to China, they're starting to see like going to China, studying China, working in China has something that could put their careers in danger. And that's the real danger of this whole thing. When people start perceiving engaging as a threat to their future, not only like the future of the nation, but their own career, like in their professional goals, that's something that everyone needs to sit down, relax, and like assess again on how to deal with that. It doesn't help the US like issuing a travel alert to China on like this exit bans, but to some extent, I don't blame them neither, in the sense that like if you want to go, like chances are like 99% chances like that you're gonna be able to go, enjoy, have like a wonderful time and come back safely, but we have to talk about the 1% as well. And I mean, it's a shame and it's a pity, because like I wish everyone would have the chance to go to China at least once in their lives. Like it's such a transformative experience in so many ways. Like I enjoyed my time there so much, and I miss so many things about my life in Beijing that I really wish everyone could have this opportunity one day. And I mean, you were there at some point as well. You know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter like how much Chinese food you eat, or like how many Chinese culture festivals you attend. Nothing compares to like being there and experiencing these and engaging with the Chinese. In general, the Chinese people, they're so nice. And that's that kindness, that friendship, it's something that I miss every day.
Exactly. My when I went there, I had no idea how China was. I heard only bad things about China back home because we
Mm.
are like enemy countries. And I reached there, was like, what? This is so much better. I
Yeah,
love it.
like I remember like when I went to China for the first time in 2014, my first city was Shanghai. And I mean, Shanghai is a big city, right? Like, so I mean, when you go to New York, I despise New York precisely because I think no one cares about you, and it can be so isolating in a sense. But when I went to Shanghai, I remember like I couldn't speak a word of Chinese, and I was trying to get somewhere, and I stopped this random dude in the middle of the streets asking in English, like like this total like lost foreigner, how to get there. He couldn't speak to me, but he understood where I was trying to go. He stopped everything to go there with me and make sure that I was there safe.
Same,
And,
same.
and this is not something that happens once in a while. This is how Chinese people behaves. And
Exactly.
once you learn the language, it's even better. Like in 2022, I went to Guangzhou for the Chinese New Year's, and I wasn't planning to do anything. But then a friend of mine, like she saw that I was in Guangzhou, and she invited me to have the New Year's dinner with her family. And I was expecting to have a meal. When I got there, like they had the elder of the village to give me a private tour, and I stopped in like every house of the village, and in every house they would give me a hongbao. Like for those that don't know what a hongbao is a red packet with money. I got back with like so much money home, and these people they never saw me before. And not to count for like the amount of Chinese, delicious Chinese food everyone would offer me, and like they would like happily engage in so much like so sophisticated topics, like that like I think like when you read about China, when you watch TV shows, especially here in the US, you have a sense that like these people are so different from you, and they are so isolated from your reality. They don't have access to the same information you do. And this is all true to some extent, but like they bring so many new perspectives to you, like it's such a different way to see life, and it's a way that dates back to 5,000 years. So yeah, I mean, we have to consider all of this.
Exactly. But you said that not everything is positive and not everything is negative. But
Yes.
right now, like you said, people are being forced to pick sides.
Yeah.
Even in the media ecosystem, everybody is picking sides. Either you are with us or without us. Taking a middle ground, like you're trying to in your stories trying to take a balanced perspective, giving all perspective. Let the kind of journalism that we started a long time back, the whole idea was do not give your opinion, let your reader, your viewer
Yeah.
decide what is right, just give all the perspectives. And that's completely changed, especially in when it comes to China. How isolating it is to be in that middle ground where you're not picking side, you're just doing your work, you're just giving the news, you're just giving facts, no opinion, you're letting your viewer decide, your reader decide. How isolating it is.
It's very isolating. I've been thinking a lot about this recently. I mean, you know better than anyone. I mean, in a way, like for the Chinese, I feel that like anything that is not 100% positive is negative. So it is increasingly difficult to show them they are trying to be balanced. I don't believe in impartial journalism. I think like when you like take your phone and you call a source, like in a way you're influencing the way the story is gonna go.
Mhm.
But I think it is our duty to be as impartial as we can. And same here in the US, right? Like if you do something or if you say something or if you report on something that contradicts this narrative of China has a threat, you're a panda hugger. I was quite surprised because like, I mean, like I moved to DC in 2022. And then last year in October, I went to a conference in Brazil with like Brazilian scholars studying China. And the
Mhm.
way they perceive things is so different from here. You know, like here in the US, it can be like it can feel like that you're in a bubble in the sense that like everyone is repeating the same talking points, and sometimes they don't even believe in that. It's just that, like if you go against the main narrative, it's gonna hurt your career, career here. Um, Especially here in DC, when everything revolves around your career. People ask your name and what you do. Um, and so like doing like sort of like doing the middle ground, trying to get sense out of so much madness from both sides can be very isolating. And in terms of like motivation, sometimes like I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes I question myself, like what I'm doing, you know, like I'm trying to be reasonable and balanced in a world that requires people to pick a side. But I keep going because I think there are so many people that agree with me and they're looking for like actual reporting on what's going on and how. I mean, it's not my job to tell you how to feel about China. Like I have my feelings about China. I know what I like, I know what I don't like, but my job is to present you with the facts. And from like out of like the facts, you can make your own opinions. Um, but it seems this is something lost, especially when it comes to China journalism, and that's very unfortunate. And that goes both ways, honestly. Like it's so difficult now, for example, as a foreigner to reach out to a source in China, either like from the company or like from the government, because there is this assumption that because you're a foreigner, you're working against China because you're not going to present facts in the way they would like facts to be presented, like a fraction version of reality. And in general, it's so difficult to get visas to be in China as a foreign journalist as well, like officially there as a journalist. And this is creating a void that is increasingly being filled with ideology and propaganda. And that's very difficult to navigate as a journalist. But I mean, it is difficult for us, but I can only imagine how it is for like the general public, you know, people that don't necessarily deal with our sources, that don't necessarily have the knowledge that we do, like how it is to pick what it's like opinion from what it's like actual reporting.
Exactly, like separating your opinion from facts. My parents, I struggle with with them because my mother always sending me these WhatsApp messages which she considers facts but are purely opinion. So I try to when I write my stories, I try to think about my mom.
Oh, yeah, like this is an advice I got from a professor at my first year in journalism back in 2012, actually. And he was like, well, whenever you finish a story and you're not like feeling okay about whether you're like actually explaining the topic you're covering or not, think about like how your mom is gonna read it and if she's gonna be able to understand it or not. I mean, if your mom works with Chinese studies, that's a different story.
My mom has no idea.
Yeah,
My
my
mom,
mom has no idea either. So yeah.
like, what are you doing? I have no idea what you're doing. Just do whatever you want to do.
Try doing what I do with my mom sometimes. Ask her, Mom, what do I do? And like listen to like what she has to say about it. It can be very revealing.
Exactly. And before you go, I really want to, congratulate you on your first book. I have it here. It's called Hearts and Minds, Votes and Contracts. It's called China State Media in Latin America. If you could tell us a little bit about this book, and before we let you go.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's finally out there after so many years paying attention to this topic. This book is the combination of like my researches at Peking University, Tsinghua, and also like some extra researching I did, like being here in the US, thanks to the Wilson Center and the Schwarzman Foundation. And my goal was trying to analyze how China's state media they are engaging with Latin America. We keep hearing about like, oh, the Chinese are spreading their tentacles all over. They're trying to influence everyone against the West, which to some degree it is true, but it's not the only true. Um, and like I was focusing on like specifically how these media relate to local media outlets and how this is effective or not to change people's perspectives on China. I think here in the West, especially in the US, there is always this assumption that because the Chinese don't know how to do journalism for the free world, so to speak,
Yeah.
uh, it's not effective at all. And we have like new interesting research showing that's quite the contrary, that it is able to change people's perspectives on China, that in general, it is an investment that is paying out in support for like China and China's diplomacy. And so like the book is basically like the first two chapters is basically explaining this need for like China to generate soft power to influence others, which is something that they joined the game much later because like for so many years they were busy with like the Cultural Revolution and dealing with like the crazy ideas Mao Zedong has, but then when they really joined the game, they came up with this total different take on how to generate soft power. And that translates on how they are like expanding their own media as well and how they are relating with these media outlets. Um, I think a big issue that I can like provide here in this conversation, I invite everyone to read the book. It is available for free on the Wilson Center's website. You just need to look for my name there. You're going to be able to find it. Is that in general there is a lack of transparency between like in terms of like the contracts that some Chinese media outlets they sign with local outlets uh, they make it difficult for the reader or the viewer to distinguish what is like independent reporting on China from content produced by the propaganda machine in China. And not everyone is able to distinguish the difference. And that's very striking. Um, like I myself, like the reason why I got so much into this subject was because when I came back to Brazil after like during COVID and like the beginning of like the whole crisis in China, I decided to apply for a job in a big TV network, like a well-known network that's been around for like almost 50 years now, because they were doing reporting on China every day. And it took me a while to realize that this reporting came from CCTV, the Chinese state-owned TV station. And I was like, well, if like even like a person like me who's paying attention to this sort of things like on a daily basis couldn't like distinguish at first immediately that this comes from the Chinese, like how about the rest of the people, you know? So it started like this and it expanded on like dozens of other different topics. So I invite everyone to read it, and I'd love to receive feedback on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Igor, for your time and for your great insights into this very interesting topic called China, Latin America, and the US, this whole dynamic and all the other topics that we touched upon. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Thank you.